My fellow citizens, Americans have known surprise attacks, but never before on thousands of civilians. We are a country awakened to danger and called to defend freedom. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Hugo Chavez is an enemy of freedom who threatens the balance of power in our hemisphere.
Señor Bush y los imperialistas que los rodean y sus lacayos aquí.
Hugo Chavez is a threat. We must take him seriously, and we must act now.
I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Mr. Hugo Chavez.
Chavez is a dictator and thus not a legitimate leader.
Well, he's a leader. He's a good leader, in fact, in the fact that he has such a following. Is he legitimate? No, he's abused his country's system, and he's setting himself up to be president for life.
Like it or not, he was elected. Since that election, he has moved dramatically away from any of the ideals of democracy.
Chavez is himself avowed to be a Marxist. He calls himself a Bolivarian, but he really is a traditional communist Marxist.
Nobody quite knows what it is, this Bolivarianism that he has invented that didn't really exist before. But that has resulted in his country going from one of the richest, most promising countries in the hemisphere to one where unemployment and poverty have both grown enormously.
According to the United Nations Human Development Index, Venezuela has experienced the largest and most rapid decline in quality of life and level of freedom of any nation on the planet.
My name is Andres Mendoza. I'm a 23-year-old journalist from Caracas, Venezuela. I recently graduated from college. 80% of our population is made out of very, very poor people. It's 80% of people who are thinking only of what they are going to eat tonight. They don't think what's going to happen to them tomorrow. They're just looking for someone that can ease the problems for today. And that's how Chavez is controlling us, controlling our population.
Chavez has carried out what you would call a traditional fascist model, economic model. Under a fascist model, the private sector is not destroyed. The private sector is controlled, it's channeled.
He began by modifying and approving a new constitution, but now he got a special law from Congress that permits him to legislate freely in more than 50 different subjects. He does whatever he wants now by law. Recently, the president has nationalized electric industry, telecommunication industry, oil industry. Now he's taking on the media.
Civil society is collapsing. Journalists are being intimidated.
When you're trying to establish a dictatorship, you have to destroy or intimidate the press so it cannot inform the people.
As soon as he announced his own television station, that says it all. This guy wants to control the press. They've passed laws to crack down on the freedom of the press.
I started working at Radio Caracas Televisión about 8 months ago. When I first got the job, I thought it was the job of a lifetime. It has 53 years on the air, and it's the most popular. It's got the biggest audience. It's part of the Venezuelan culture. But he simply doesn't like the way we tell the news to the Venezuelan people. He doesn't like the way we report what's going on here, and he doesn't like the way we analyze his government and his policies. That's why he's shutting us down.
Thomas Jefferson said that if he had to choose between a government without a media or a media without a government, he would choose a media without a government, because it is that important to freedom.
We don't seem to have a press or media that fully understands the danger that Chavez poses today. We didn't recognize that Castro was the kind of threat he was until maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis came along. Chavez is the same way, and even worse. The public doesn't know this. The press is not letting the public know how big a threat Chavez is to us, to our national security, to this hemisphere.
Chavez has crafted a masterful political warfare campaign in America. This strategy includes contributions to major public figures, the showcasing of his relationships with high-profile celebrities, and his discounted oil programs run through the Chavez-controlled Citgo brand, a program championed by many of America's elite.
Remember, the Kennedys had this wonderful charity in Boston of providing cheap home heating oil to Massachusetts poor people. That was all Angolan oil that was being run through this Kennedy-controlled nonprofit in a similar way that Chavez is running his oil through Harlem and through other interests up in the northeastern United States.
I mean, there are a lot of Americans here in Congress. Some members of Congress have even invited Chavez to send oil to their congressional districts. And, you know, they have press conferences and they send out press releases that they've gotten discounted oil. What they don't tell their constituents is that that so-called discounted oil is coming from an axis of evil that is planning, along with Iran, along with Castro, along with the other terrorist states, to bring us to our knees.
He has Jack Kemp as one of his lobbyists. He's promised Jack Kemp a big stake in oil revenues, and Kemp has been shameless about promoting Chavez, going up to the Wall Street Journal to try to peddle Chavez's line up there, and the journal editors smacked him down. So this is not a liberal Democrat problem. This is a bipartisan problem of political corruption in Washington.
I think it should present a problem. It should bother people's sense of ethics, I think, to be taking oil from a terrorist collaborator. He's really a pathetic character, Chavez. He gives money to Castro and receives orders from Castro instead of giving Castro orders. So it's the ultimate pathetic colony. Castro has achieved what he always dreamt of in Venezuela, which is to have a colony in this hemisphere. And he's got a colony with a subnormal psychopath, Hugo Chavez, who is motivated by envy, resentment, has all sorts of complexes, hates the United States.
He was able to come to the UN. He gave a speech that was demeaning to the United States and the principles that we believe in.
From this rostrum, the President of the United States, the gentleman to whom I refer as the devil, yesterday the devil came here. Right here. And it smells of sulfur still today. The immoral veto of the United States allowed the Israelis with impunity to destroy Lebanon. It smells of sulfur here, but God is with us, and I embrace you all. May God bless us all. Good day to you.
He has been trying desperately to pick a fight with us. He has called our Secretary of State every racial slur and human body part slur that you can think of, and she hasn't taken the bait.
He is anti-Semitic, he's anti-Jew, he's preaching hatred of Jews in his country, which is something we've never seen in the Western Hemisphere before.
What you have is an axis of evil, a global axis of evil, in formation now through Caracas, Venezuela.
You can look at the relationships that Hugo Chavez has and is developing, North Korea, Iran, and in his own words, he talks about attacking the United States.
Chavez continues to publicly proclaim his intention of waging an asymmetric war against the U.S. A key element of this strategy is his network of allies, representing a who's who of global terror sponsors.
You can be a communist, you can be a left-winger of any type, you can be a drug trafficker, you can be a Shiite, or you could be Osama bin Laden. As long as you're against the United States, Chavez will take you as an ally.
Chavez is collaborating with the enemy, that is the radical Islamist enemy. He has said that he favors the kind of revolution that the radical Islamists want to see take place in their part of the world.
The Iranian-Venezuelan relationship is close. They have made numerous very hostile declarations about their joint struggles against what they call American imperialism as well as Israel. The only explanation for this closeness between Iran and Venezuela is that they share this anti-Western violent ideology.
Iran Air, Iran's national airline, now operates a flight between Tehran and Caracas, providing a direct and convenient pipeline for importing terrorism into the region.
Iran and Venezuela have issued a joint postage stamp, for example. So it just shows how the depth and the width of the Iranian-Chavez cooperation.
Credible reports from former high-ranking Venezuelan officials detail how Chavez and his government have provided false Venezuelan passports and other official documentation to over 300 known Islamic terrorists, including suspected members of Al-Qaeda.
Hugo Chavez is a real threat to the national security interests of the United States. There is an operational Hezbollah Latin America, a unit in his country, in Venezuela, that he allows to operate. He's partners with Iran. He is allowing identity documents to be produced for them that in turn can be used to get passports and possibly American visas to come here perfectly under color of law.
This should not come as a surprise to anyone who knows who Chavez's friends are. From the very beginning, his first international friend was Fidel Castro, a person who was a terrorist himself, came to power through terrorism, bombings, assassinations, etc. And then once he took over Cuba, turned the island into a training camp for terrorists from all over the hemisphere. Those terrorists, from all the way from Mexico to Argentina and the Middle East and other parts of the world, are Chavez's friends, and they are in Venezuela.
He spread his revolution to Ecuador, to Bolivia, wants to take it elsewhere. In the case of Bolivia, he's had direct involvement that supported the coming to power of a president in Bolivia who is open to allowing a free growth of narcotics and narcotics trafficking. He's also said no to the DEA, our Drug Enforcement Administration, said you cannot operate on my property anymore. Those who tell me, who know better, say that perhaps upwards of 80% of the cocaine coming out of Colombia today ships transnationally through Venezuela. It's quite possible that Hugo Chavez is going to wind up being the largest drug kingpin in history.
We do know they provide sanctuary for the FARC in Venezuela. They provided the FARC narco-terrorists with Venezuelan identity papers. They allow the FARC narco-terrorists to use Venezuelan territory for sanctuary and for arms trafficking. And they've also, on at least one occasion, the Venezuelan Air Force has provided air cover for FARC guerrillas who were infiltrating back into Colombia.
As that revolution continues and his efforts to try to support the FARC in Colombia grow, there's a very real chance that at some point there'll be a war in Latin America.
The Chavez regime's unprecedented buying spree of military hardware will have a destabilizing effect on the entire region. Some of these weapons, which include Russian-made small arms, over 1 million rounds of ammunition, as well as attack fighters and helicopters, reportedly to be piloted by Cuban military officers, are said to be earmarked for a new paramilitary organization loyal to Chavez and his allies throughout the hemisphere.
They want to continue to be able to build an army and have the weapons so that they can be more of a threat and disrupt the balance of power. It's clear.
Venezuela had 40 years of democracy from 58 to 98, and the Venezuelan military had adhered to the principle of civilian control of the military. They were respectful of the Constitution and the laws. That is no longer the case. They now respond to Chavez's dictates, to his party. They become his tools for the control of the population.
For years, it had been a very dependable partner of the United States. We had a very strong Air Force relationship with Venezuela, a very strong naval relationship, and to a lesser degree, a relationship on the Army side, although we had a good-sized Special Forces contingent there. Chavez kicked out our Special Forces and replaced them with Chinese troops.
The Chinese-Venezuela relationship is extremely worrisome. The Chinese have a plan, and we have a problem, because their plan is to substitute the United States in the Western Hemisphere as the primary power. Not only economically, but militarily. So they view Chavez and his resources as a great ally in their quest to substitute the United States as the primary power and really to reduce us to, France status. And they see Chavez and his axis of evil as a great ally in their quest to become the primary power in the Western Hemisphere.
Now that we have an embargo on the Venezuelan military, the only countries breaking that embargo are China, Russia, and Europe.
Chavez has signed an agreement with Russia to build weapons and ammunition manufacturing facilities in Venezuela.
When we saw that Hugo Chavez purchased $3 billion worth of military equipment, and at the same time, in his own words, talks about wanting to attack the United States, it's not a relationship that I'm comfortable with, obviously.
Putin is very happy to pick up whatever arms markets the United States cuts itself off from. And with the 2 new Kalashnikov factories that he has the Russian license to build now in his country, he's going to have an unlimited capability to sow political violence to a scale that we've never seen.
What's going to happen as the region destabilizes? As the revolution, the Bolivarian revolution, continues, there's no doubt that Chavez is going to try to see that revolution succeed.
He's building a global constituency around the world. He's really being a leader in that score, leading a lot of countries, a lot of different movements, a lot of very frustrated nationalist and ideological movements around the world that really have no global leader. He's trying to be that global leader.
We have been very lucky in Mexico that Felipe Calderón won the elections and not Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who was the candidate of the left.
The Mexicans are extremely nationalistic, so it's not just the gringos they're concerned about. It got to such a point where Mexico almost broke diplomatic relations with Venezuela and has been leading a lot of Latin American countries in opposition to Chavez. If they'd been successful in Mexico, you would have seen a wholesale change in Mexican policy toward the United States. With that border, you would see Mexico becoming our #1 security problem, and Iraq would become a sideshow.
The United States has tended to underestimate the importance of Latin America in general, and of Venezuela in particular.
First, Latin America is really a loser issue to follow if you're a careerist, either in or out of government. It's always the same frustrations over and over and over and over. A lot of these countries can never seem to get their act together, so it's just a nightmare for policy people to deal with. And people are sick of it. With the Fidel Castros and all of this, they're just tired of it all. And we wish the problem would go away. But the fact is, it won't go away.
We really have to be helping the Venezuelan people. First of all, it was a big mistake. When Chavez stole the referendum in 2004, that was really a time and a place to say no. There was such enthusiasm on the part of the Venezuelan people. And all the exit polls showed unanimously 59, 60% anti-Chavez vote. Well, when the results came in, 59, 60% pro-Chavez. So what he did was he switched the software from anti to pro. Yes became no, no became yes. And then of course you had Mr. Jimmy Carter, who was there, and the OAS. And both of them, before even the so-called Electoral Council could announce the result, they were already saying how wonderful the referendum had been.
For the Carter Center to certify the phony elections that Chavez used to keep himself in power, and for the State Department then to point to that as reasons for Chavez to be a legitimate leader, that completely undermined any effort we could have made at the time to try to restore a real democratic system in Venezuela, and we didn't stand by the Venezuelan opposition. Is we have to stop letting the Jimmy Carters of the world dictate the agendas of the United States in the Western Hemisphere.
It's very important that the United States, we in this government, act now. It'd be much easier if we were able to take him on directly now instead of waiting until he's able to build up whatever either forces or friends that he is trying to put together. I believe the policy of kind of hands-off is a failed policy. We do not want to let this guy continue to grow.
Whether or not we can remove his presence politically and isolate him remains to be seen, but if he continues to grow in threat, continues to destabilize this hemisphere, continues to ally himself as he has with radical Islam, at some point we have to take real action to stop that. Is that military action? I hope not, but if that's what it takes to do it, I think ultimately that's what we're going to have to do.
We should have a strong intelligence collection effort aimed at gaining political intelligence on Chavez and his supporters. Real information about the weird things they do outside the public eye, their corruption, their nepotism, their brutality, their paranoia, and we should make all of that public in a long-term strategic political warfare and psychological warfare campaign aimed at helping that regime to self-destruct.
We ought to have a policy also of letting the Venezuelan people know and the people of Latin America know that we support them and that we are supporting them. I think we failed in delivering that message.
We are losing our free press. We are losing our capacity to choose where our kids are going to study and what they are going to study. And every day, the control from the government is more and more strengthful. Many people are dying here. We have our statistics say that there's one Venezuelan killed every half an hour. We are practically living a war.
It's never too late to reverse any trend. As long as there's hope and as long as there's brave Venezuelans willing to risk their lives to stand up to Chavez and to his thugs and to the Cuban advisors, so-called advisors, who are intelligence and military and other indoctrinators who are in Venezuela to support Chavez's establishment of a dictatorship. It's not too late.
To me, this whole argument, this whole debate with Hugo Chavez is simple. He wants policies of destruction and despair for his people. And we want policies of hope and opportunity. He wants to limit hope and opportunity for the people of Venezuela and in Latin America.